I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer at Gold Derby, and I'm excited to talk about the second season of The Morning Show with Emmy-winning re-recording mixer Elmo Ponsdomenech. Elmo, what was your initial reaction when you first learned, after production on season two had already begun and been shut down, that it was going to be rewritten in order to incorporate the pandemic?
Well, hi, Luca. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
It was exciting. The morning show was the first show that we came back well, I'm going to say post-pandemic. It was still ongoing, of course.
We
But it was the first one that we did on the lot in its entirety because for the last, year and a half, 2 years, we've been doing piecemeal. Some things have been remote, some things have been hybrid, some remote, some on the stage
mhm,
at the studio. So it was exciting for us to get back to the stage with a client. Lisa Vinicors, our post producer, was with us for the
mhm,
mixes,
mhm.
as well as for the playbacks. We had our friends from Media Res were with us. Otherwise, we had a backfill of about, I don't know, 15 or 20 that were remote throughout the playbacks. But it was really fun for us to be back on the lot and, heavily tested, mind you, and socially distanced and masked, etc. But it was fun to be together with people again because it had been some time. So we were very excited that they'd done some rewriting to accommodate what happened,
Mhm.
um, and incorporate that into the storyline. And it was a little emotional. I won't lie to you. Doing the first episode, it was a bit emotional seeing. It starts with a pan across of New York City,
Yep.
empty,
Yep.
just empty, and sirens and a couple of little random things, but not the New York that most of us know or know of. So it made the hairs on your arms stand up a little bit.
Oh,
It was something else to see, and they did a great job incorporating the pandemic into the storyline. So it was an adventure.
absolutely. And I was going to say, the incorporation of the pandemic completely informs the structure of that first episode, for which you and your colleagues were
Yeah.
nominated for a Cinema Audio Society Award. So, first
Thank
off,
you.
talk
Yeah.
about, of course, talk about just getting to mix Reese Witherspoon and Hassam Minaj's rendition of What Are You Doing New Year's Eve?
You're right. Uh, well, how lucky am I? If you look at the cast on the show and the people involved and the directors and the picture editors are just fabulous. So it's a pleasure. Mimi Leader's the lead director on the shows and an executive producer and basically runs post production. And has quite a huge track record as well as the opening episode. Was Sydney Walensky was the picture editor who has done Shape of Water among many other great films and so we're in incredible company and it was very exciting to be with that group and work with that group and
Can
certainly Reese and Jennifer Aniston and Steve Carell and Billy Crudup and Juliana Margulies is
Oh,
like
yeah.
this incredible cast so pretty hard to go wrong. You put any words you want in front of those people, and it's art, you know.
It
So
really
it's great.
is.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And, the episode, which takes place 7 months after the events of the season one finale, at least for the most part, also finds Alex in snowy Maine, where she's living in a much quieter and more secluded life while writing, her tell all book on her career. And,
right,
what
right.
was some of that subtler mixing that you did in those scenes to establish the sound of this new location in Maine?
Well, one of the fun things for us, and my partner Jason Frenchie, Gaia, he goes by Frenchie,
Mhm.
did a fabulous job with the backgrounds and just selling the isolation of where she was and the little fire going in the outside and little snowy environment and just wonder we're lucky that we're able to mix a show in Atmos. So for us, we go the extreme of having all this beautiful spatial canvas to work with. And Frenchie did a beautiful job of carving that little world for her, and I think it works really nicely.
It really does. It's such a cozy environment.
Yeah,
I won't go
I was
ahead.
gonna say a nice contrast to New York, even though a different New York right now at this
Yeah.
stage of the game.
Absolutely. And, going back to New York, there's the ball drop in Times Square, which is a scene of great scale. So, talk about mixing the extravaganza and sheer volume of that event and making sure at the same time that it didn't overshadow some of the important dialogue that takes place during those scenes.
Yeah, I mean, selling the New Year's Eve in New York at any time, whatever's going on, is something, right? Because
Yeah.
it's quite an event there. And I think really it was a matter of us, like you said, just trying to keep clear of story while selling the excitement of, of New Year's and this, traditional soundscape, if you will. So there are a lot of moving parts there, in terms of like the newscasters, the announcers, things going off, cannons blowing up, and all kinds of things happening. So it's t-shirt cannons, by the way, I think were confetti.
Right.
Yeah, so a lot of fun to have that contrast, I think, and just gives us something to weave and fill up some speakers and have some fun with.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the season opened with a bang, and that was just such a
It
massive
did.
production, or looked like a massive production.
Oh
And
yeah.
I remember once that episode dropped that there was a lot of talk about the sneeze toward the end of that episode for obvious reasons. So, how did you ensure
Right.
that it was noticeable but didn't overemphasize it to the extent that it would feel comical, which I think could easily happen with something like this, but wasn't the case on the
Right.
show?
Well, I think it was really a matter of trying not to point it out too much and just letting
Right.
people like you did catch it, which
Hmm.
is that look, we know where this is going. We all know where that was going, worldwide, sadly.
Right.
And it was quite the setup for what was to come, So I think really it was a matter of trying to stay out of the way without appearing we were staying out of the way, if you know what I
Mhm.
mean. So,
Absolutely.
just trying to keep it alive and keep that environment so it's not, look at this, but just, have it be a part of that soundscape, you know.
Mm. Absolutely. And, building there on what I loved about the entire sequence is that it felt like a prelude to the horror show that was early 2020,
Right.
which is, also something that carries over into the scenes in Wuhan and Beijing that we get to see. What went
Yes.
into creating that sense of disarray that we see in Beijing and Wuhan with sound, especially since those scenes were filmed in California?
Right. For one thing, I think one thing that is not lost throughout all of it is we all lived through this,
Mhm.
in our way, and that terror of it in its way is something we all had a little piece of. We know what that is. To put it in a situation that I think none of us would like to be at, a subway or train station full of, thousands of people trying to get out or trying to move on or whatever in a time when that's like the worst case. It's exactly what we shouldn't be doing. I think it was very important to the producers and to Mimi and the picture editor to make sure that we sold where we were, that you heard language that was common there, and that it was, that there was a little panic, not so much just, not all out panic, but humanity. I mean, people were scared, so they really wanted to sell that, and I think they did a great job of that. Visually, which helps us. For us, we just mostly throw numbers of people at it. In terms of group ADR and effects wallas and the ruckus of people moving about and suitcases falling and that sort of thing. Police shouting orders. Scary situation. So kind of easy to sell. I want to say from our perspective, so we were given really good elements for that. Um, and the contrast of that, especially seeing the train stations in
Right.
comparison to a screening room
Oh,
come
yeah.
at direct after, I believe is how that led
Mhm.
into. Um, it's pretty stark and startling and I think moving in a lot of ways.
Definitely. It was very harrowing to watch, I have to say. I mean, this
Right?
came out in, I believe it was October, the third episode, or October, November, around then that it came out. And, we're 1.5 years
Yeah.
into this scary reality. So it was certainly harrowing, but
Right.
I think it's still so important that it was incorporated. And the show, also visits another epicenter or early epicenter of the pandemic, being Italy, a place whose sounds and atmosphere are many people are generally familiar with, between the
Yes.
motorcycles and or mopeds, the harbor sounds, and just the people in
Yeah.
general. So walk
Right.
me through the nuances of mixing some of those establishing scenes at Lake Como.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, first of all, they were not at Lake Como, so there's that.
Yeah, yeah.
For us, the first time that we saw it was a big green screen with Steve Carell walking, through the village or what have you, and you look at that wondering how is this, they're really going to sell this, and in fact, I want to say they did very well. When we first saw the backgrounds, we were pretty blown away. The lake is right behind them, and it's like, it's real. It feels real. But again, Mimi's very specific about wanting to hear the Italian voices popping and conversation popping, and some multilingual. The normalcy of our tourists and
Yeah.
people from other places also. So there was that, but making sure that you got a feel that you were actually there. And I think sonically, if you close your eyes, it does feel that way. And I think to some degree, that's what we do until we see the final picture and we have a better idea of what's going to be in the back, in the background.
Mhm.
Um, the voices, I think, more than anything with them were very important because they wanted it to be very animated.
Oh yeah.
But you're right. There were things, mopeds and occasional Italian siren and what have you. So the things to try to sell the this cultural space. But that was a lot of fun. You know, Especially seeing where they came from and what it got to. Because I mean, I look at those shots now. There'll be a wide shot of him walking down the street talking to his former boss
Mhm.
and the lakes in the background, and the cities, the town is in the background, and the people in the cafes and everything, and it feels like you're there. It's pretty amazing.
It's
Great filmmaking on their part.
it really is. It's very believable. You really do feel like you're
Really,
there. You would absolutely not believe that that was not shot there, and
I
I
know,
think
right?
that's a testament. And
It is.
I would actually like to zoom in on one of the scenes in Italy, or on the show in Italy,
Sure.
starting with Mitch's car scene in episode 7, at the very end
Okay.
of the episode, because there's a lot of interesting mixing going on there between the voiceovers, and then there's everything that comes after it cuts to white, including that sound of the wind and then those mellow piano notes. What was important to you when working on this very pivotal scene?
Well, feeling that you were in his head, I think more than anything, feeling some panic and then a strange sense of peace with him. And we spent a lot of time on that scene. We went back and forth and tried very different versions of it, with less treatment in the voices that he heard, and less.
Mhm.
Some were a little more dramatic in terms of the car sounds and the last of whatever you hear there. So it was it was interesting, and an adventure, I think, to see how to watch the creative development of it, from the other filmmakers, from Mimi and from the other producers, who didn't always have the same point of view as, well, let's try it, this way, or let's try it that way. Some of them liked it better one way than the other, and finding that place in the middle that was a compromise that worked for everyone, and I think ultimately did worked well for the story, So it's the beauty of having very creative voices involved that are willing to collaborate, and give a little bit in each direction. So it's quite the. I mean, I have to say it's quite a pleasant team for me to work with, because it's they have a really strong vision, but at the same time they're very collaborative and like what everyone brings to the table and are open to that, and that's what makes a great show, I think, or a great film.
Absolutely, and that's always great to hear. And
Yeah.
another scene I absolutely loved is actually in the following episode when Chip breaks the news to Alex.
Yeah.
There's this sense of dread in the air, thanks to the quiet and cold sound of the wind, and then the sad but understated score in the background. But most
Right.
noticeable is when the sound is completely turned off and all we hear is the score. So, what
Yes.
was the idea behind that creative decision?
Well, I think that went back to their cut, and
Okay.
they Where that happened was what was in contention a lot of the time. Is like, and I don't want to give anything away, but at what point
Okay.
do you start to feel silence?
Mhm.
And Carter Burwell, the composer, creates a really haunting score there. I think is really
Really
fantastic,
good.
right? So it's finding a place to let that live and give it a minute to tell the story that without without depending on what you're looking at is a testament to him. I mean, he's an incredible composer and knows how to grab a feeling and run with it. The specifics of the timing, I couldn't tell you now. Actually, looking back at it, it's a mess. It's a bit of a jumble of who said what and when and where what decision was made. But ultimately, they came together and accepted a version that was acceptable to everyone and worked well. I think.
It worked very well. It's a very affecting scene. It's,
Yeah.
one of the scenes I rewatched the most from this season, and I think it captures the
Interesting.
emotions perfectly because
It
of.
would be interesting. There were multiple mixed versions
Mm,
of that scene that we played back A, B, C, and just, I want to say we narrowed it down to one or two or three choices and went back and forth and then maybe a little hybrid of, of those versions.
and what ended up, or how did you decide which one to use ultimately?
Well, I think ultimately that decision came down to Mimi
Okay.
and the other producers. Um, as far and don't get me wrong, they give us a lot of rope to present to them different versions and different ways of doing things, which is great.
Mhm.
um, and gives us a great sensation of being involved in a part of the filmmaking, which is to their credit. um, but I want to say in that case ultimately it came down to, I want to say, Mimi and the people that represent Reese and Jennifer's companies,
Okay.
who are very involved in how that pans out creatively with their voice, because they all have a vision of how they'd like to see things presented. So
Of course. And before we slowly wrap things up, I do want to ask, is there a scene, a storyline, or an episode that was particularly challenging or fun to work on that we have not touched on, but that you would like to highlight?
uh, touching, I would say that the beginning opening with the shots of New York empty and the music um, was haunting and brought us into what we were about to do in terms of reliving a little bit some of what all of us either experienced or saw in the last couple of years. And from that respect, I would say emotional, maybe not challenging in an audio sense, but it was very satisfying emotionally. And a there's a few scenes uh, in that season that I want to say fit that bill. Um, the hospital scenes and
Right.
you know watching the way the networks might deal with, how do we deal with this, and what do we tell people, and the reality that those people, the ones that tell us what's going on in the world, are just like us. They're just regular people living what we're living. So it's an exciting show in that regard, and that it's very, it touches a lot of nerves, and I want to say really hits home.
It certainly does, especially
Yeah,
this past season. It was
for sure.
very emotionally affecting on a completely different level from the first
Right.
season. And
Yeah,
I guess,
exactly.
I
And
mean,
incorporates what was in the first season, of course, because we want to
absolutely.
see, we all need to see how that played out, with Steve Carell's character and whatnot. And there's a lot of evolution.
Oh, of course, of
Yeah.
course. On a final note, I do briefly want to mention Barry, whose third season is currently airing on HBO, and for
Yes.
which you, a 12-time nominee, won back-to-back Emmys. What I love
Thank
about this show is how it becomes more and more outrageous with each passing season in all the
Right.
best ways. Oh, absolutely. So, just very briefly, how did working on this season differ from the past two, given the increasing scale and scope of this story?
Whew. I want to say, from a mixing standpoint, it's not dissimilar to the other ones in terms of the
Okay.
level of excitement and stuff. The only thing I will say is, I mean, there's a level of intensity in this season that's different and new in a sense. And again, and speaking to how lucky I am, Bill Hader, oh my God, right? I mean,
Fantastic.
what the performances are crazy. And I'm lucky that he's in the room and he's very much the driving voice of the show as far as like, I mean, he's a true showrunner and directs the episodes himself. And, you know, um, there's, we've seen an evolution in him and that's, you know, mixing sound in that part of filmmaking was new to him when we started, and now he's in command. I mean, it's wonderful to see, and the most collaborative guy. I mean, he loves what we bring to the table. He only pushes us to make things better. It doesn't. It's never like, oh, you took away that really cool thing I did. He's always, you know, how do we improve it and how do we, you know, evolve it and tell the story better.
Mhm.
Um, but very exciting. I mean, it's an incredible season, and his performance is it's nuts. So if you like, if you think it's good at the beginning, just it just gets better. I mean, it's just incredible. So really fun. Very blessed to work on it. We literally wrapped that show a week ago, so
Oh, really?
it's very fresh in my brain, and that's why if I sound a little excited, it's because I'm very excited. Yeah,
That's Well, that's interesting. And between Barry and the morning show, it's certainly fascinating work that you're doing. So thank you so much for walking me through your creative process today. I
of
really appreciate
course.
it.